protecting. Take First Alert. Welcome to This Week in Kansas with your host, Tim Brown.
Hello and welcome to This Week in Kansas. Thank you for being with us this morning. Kansas lawmakers are considering a proposal to raise the state sales tax while cutting taxes on food purchases. Now, this change would give Kansas the 8th highest sales tax in the nation. It's just one of many proposals on the table to fill a big budget hole. Uber is sticking around for a while. Lawmakers in the ridesharing outfit announced a plan to keep Uber in the state. We will also talk about liquor sales and various other things, including Chris Kobach's election bill. Let's start with budget and revenue, though. I think that's the biggest hurdle that we see lawmakers facing in the state, and you know, it's been a challenging year, and we've seen a lot of different proposals. This latest one, another sales tax proposal.
Yes, indeed. And of course, it's very important to keep in mind that 51% of this budget goes to education.
Yep.
So the K-12 schools are extremely interested in this because some of them are even having to close a little bit short. But they've got to close the hole. This is a balanced budget state, and this has taken priority over a whole lot of other issues that have sunk below the line. Yep. So that's what's kept them busy this week.
Bob, taxes, you know, when we talk about tax increases, we of course, there were a lot of lawmakers who said that tax increases would not happen in any way, shape, or form, but we have an election year coming up as well. So this is a tough sell, I would think.
I spent a day up at the State House last week, and we talked to a group of 8 legislators from this area of town, and all of them except one were resigned to some sort of revenue increase, tax increase, and these are people who would normally be conservatives. And you have people like Steve Brunk, who told the Wichita Eagle that his ideology is for lower taxes, but he has to face reality. Well, I thought an ideology was something you really truly believed in. So we start to see a lot of lawmakers are just peeling away from taxes. I mean, the Senate President Susan Wagle, she signed the Grover Norquist no new taxes pledge, but she said from the beginning of the year that everything's on the table. So some of these pledges that lawmakers sign, we see, are not worth the paper they were printed on, unfortunately.
Michael, these lawmakers, I think to some degree, have kind of painted themselves in a corner.
I agree. As I mentioned on the show a few weeks ago, that's one of the big differences we see in governance, that in the old days, it was all well and good to run on campaign promises of you know, quick, good-sounding things like I'm going to cut everybody's taxes or never raise taxes or what have you. But then reality set in, and the elected officials would go to Eggs and Issues, and they would go to these other events and say, you know what, I've learned that reality is a little bit more complex than that. And today, it's more consultant-driven. It's more talking point-driven. And so there's this sense that you have to stick to the talking points, even if they don't fit the things you've learned since getting into the legislature. And it's a whole different way of governing. And there are a lot of people ready to punish, for example, in the Republican Party, ready to run against people in the primary if they deviate at all from the talking points that were scripted for them by political consultants. It's a whole different way of governing than the old way. And of course, I like the old way better. But, you know, that's a heck of a budget hole. And remember that that budget hole is assuming that everything is fine with their block grant plan for the schools. If the courts say that's not okay, it's going to grow the budget hole further.
Yeah. You know, Michael, we've talked a little bit about these tax increases in the past, and the fact that a lot of people look at these as regressive taxes because they're sales taxes and that sort of thing. But have any lawmakers wavered at all? I don't think this has much of a chance, but I want to get your thought on any kind of an income tax increase.
It depends on how you define income tax increase. There's one issue that is moving, and it would narrow the doing away with taxes on business partnerships that the governor passed, or got passed by the legislature a few years ago. The new thought is that that's kind of a loophole for business partnerships that don't actually have any employees. And so the legislature, many in the legislature, I should say, are moving toward the idea that, well, if you have something that's registered as a business with no employees, that's really more of a tax loophole for personal income. And so that would be that would constitute an income tax increase of a sort. It wouldn't be an increase in rates, but it would be a way of getting some additional revenues. Also, of course, we're talking about sales and property taxes as well.
And sometimes those proposals to do away with the elimination of tax on pass-through income is accompanied by a tax credit that's a portion of a payroll, so that if you're a small business that actually hires someone, then you could get something back, and maybe that's revenue neutral or not. And you know, when you change taxes around but it's revenue neutral, then that gives some lawmakers cover to say, I didn't vote for a tax increase, it's just shifting the tax around to different people. The sad thing is that this doesn't have to happen. I went back and looked at an article I wrote from 2012 that says, okay, we've got the lower taxes, now we have to plan for lower spending. And the legislature and the governor have not done that. I brought up, you know, there's zero-based budgeting, there's performance-based budgeting that some states have used and found to be helpful. Not a peep from anybody in the Kansas legislature about that. There's these streamlining commissions. There is a small gesture to that in the budget bill that was passed, but that won't help this year. There's really no, because the legislator, the leadership, and the governor have not looked at cutting spending except for, like, let's say the K through 12 commission, which the schools were dragged kicking and screaming into and insisted that there's nowhere that they can cut. We just haven't seen any desire by people to cut spending. So I agree with what Michael said, but I also agree with the fact that almost everybody likes to spend other people's money, starting with the governor on down. They just don't want to give up.
Well, and Bob, we kind of did this thing on a wing and a prayer. It seemed like, you know, we cut the taxes, but then we hoped that business would grow enough to make up the difference. And I think a lot of people on this program said, you know, doubted the reality of that and the opportunity for that to actually happen. So it seems like it's poor planning. And Richard, you had a point.
Yes. Some people are still hardcore and say, if we get $100 back on my state taxes, then I'll go ahead and spend that, and that will increase business, it'll increase other revenues and income. But we've already had a year where across the whole nation, not just in Kansas, we've had a massive amount of money come back from gasoline being over $1 less than it was the year before. And when they look real close at what happens to that, it didn't go all into spending. We reduced our debt, we saved, and did other bad things like that. And so you can't always assume that a tax rebate is going to generate a lot more money. In fact, it's generated a lot less.
That was tongue-in-cheek, I think. Anyway, we're going to take a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to have an education update. We'll be back in just a minute.
If you think about it, the plumbing system in your house is really not so different than the plumbing system in your body. Over time, they both become less reliable. Nobody knows that better than the experts at Benjamin Franklin Plumbing. Hey, Chris, how's the patient?
Bottom's rusted out.
Point is, if you don't take care of your plumbing will let you down.
This one's leaking.
That is embarrassing. For maintenance and replacement programs, call Benjamin Franklin Plumbing.
Hey, Mike, do you smell gas?
Gas? No, not me.
When we created the Silverado Rally Edition, we figured, why stop there? These 4 new Silverado Special Editions are just the beginning. From this year's fastest growing full-size truck brand, Chevy Silverado. Or during the Chevy Memorial Day sale, choose this Silverado All-Star with a total value of $8,500 when you finance through select lenders. See your local Chevy dealer today.
And welcome back. A couple of big issues facing educators across the state, or just actually facing all of us who have any kind of an iron in the fire for education, and I guess we kind of all do to one point or another. Coalition for Independent School Districts, you were talking a little bit about that during the break, and this is a group that you were telling us is exempt from.
That's right. It's 2 years ago, the legislature put through a proposal where innovative school districts can be exempt from all rules and regulations that are applicable to school districts. It could be 10% of the school districts and an additional 10% if they had certain Title I eligibility. So there are 286 school districts, that means 28 plus 28, you're going to have 56 schools in this. Right now there are only 6, and they've met and they've put together some proposals. It's a wide variety. There's Blue Valley on one side in Kansas City, Kansas, and then you have some rural schools like Hugoton on the other. And they're just beginning to come before the State Board of Education. Not completely sure why, because in the end they are exempt. but they would like some legitimacy. And it has caused a lot of testimony in public forum, both last month and some this month, because of the proposal. We might be the first state to totally deprofessionalize teaching, which is to say, we're short on medical doctors, so let's let other people practice medicine. And same thing for teaching.
Bob, any thoughts?
Well, why would a school district want to hire a bad teacher or retain a bad teacher for that matter?
It's not so much a bad teacher, it's just we have two situations. We do have the Blue Valley School, which is very rich and is on one complete area. And the truth is, what they're looking for maybe would be to have someone in business, higher ed business, not higher ed, but higher business, that would come over and perhaps teach. And we're not concerned about Blue Valley, but we are concerned about the rural school districts represented by Hugoton. And in Hugoton's plan, they're very blunt about the fact we cannot get qualified teachers, and therefore we would like to, and then their plan is a sort of a grow your own one. So it's one where they would like to license locally, which means you started teaching, and if you could succeed in some way, if they could show you were succeeding, then you would be licensed only by them. It's sort of like indentured servitude. You couldn't become a teacher anywhere else. You could only be for them.
But
and the quality is the concern you have.
But Richard, for these districts or these areas that are having a difficult time hiring teachers, what
do we do?
Yeah.
And that's a toughie because the shortage is coming on, and it's coming on fast. And they're already, I have great feelings for superintendents and principals, especially in rural districts where there is simply, they put out 3 job applications and there's not even one applicant.
Is this a self-inflicted wound for the state of Kansas?
Self-inflicted, it would be not so good if we were the first state to deprofessionalize completely and allow anyone to be hired. Because if you take a close look at the State Board of Education regulations, you will find that there is lots of options for waivers. We've been short on special ed now for the last 10 years. We're short on science in all fields and have been for quite a while. So you have to bring them in under waivers. You have ways in which they can start teaching and work their way towards getting the coursework and so on. Hugoton really represents some of the rural school districts' concerns that it costs us money to have to send them back. Tuition's gone up, and to get them fully all the coursework they're going to need to teach. And so opening up the door really, when I use the example with, we're short on medical doctors in western Kansas. Why not let the pharmacist, why not let the veterinarian? And let's just count outcomes, which in the case of schools is just test scores. And if there's one thing that most parents and teachers want to get away from, it's teaching to the test. And you don't have to be real bright to just drill the kids and be one page ahead of them in the book. So this has raised up a lot of concerns. Now the truth is, we brought it on in some cases in education because we charge too much tuition. It costs an awful lot more to be a teacher today. And sometimes some of the courses that may be required may not seem to be needed. Not in sciences and special ed, but in some other areas. But the school already has waivers to take care of all of the exemptions that have been asked for.
Michael, you want to jump in with any thoughts?
Well, I just point out that this is, to an extent, a money problem. We have teacher job candidates on the market right now. They're very well qualified, and a lot of them do get jobs, but some of them have to cycle through a year or two. If you look at some of these rural districts, the pay is just shockingly low. It's at the point now where I'm advising our social science education majors not to get their master's degree before they go on the job market, because that would mean that they would get paid more and the school district won't hire them because they can't afford it. Wait until you get tenure to get your master's degree. That's kind of embarrassing to be giving students advice like that, although I think it is grounded in the market. I understand that there are some real issues getting special ed and science teachers and others to move to rural communities like western Kansas, but certainly there are plenty that are interested in the small town market or even want that. So to some extent, this is a financial issue, not just a teacher shortage issue.
Yeah. Richard, your other topic you wanted to talk about, increasing qualifications for certain instructors?
That's true. We've had a concurrent enrollment or a dual credit program out there where high school students, starting as sophomores, can start taking courses and get college credit for it as well. In fact, some cases, students are going into college with 1 whole year of college already under their belt for credit for courses they took in high school. And until very recently, the requirements on that were a bachelor's with 18 of those hours in the field. That has been jumped to a master's plus 18. And this is going to really reduce the number of instructors that are going to be able to offer these courses that then will be able to be accepted by the region schools across the state. The community colleges and tech schools could also hire someone with just a bachelor's and 24 in that case in the field, and that's now switching to a master's plus 18. And the 18 has to be graduate work in the field that's being taught. This has caused a lot of consternation because even though the program, when it was conceived and approved over a decade ago, was to allow the Doogie Housers, the few special people, the principal was supposed to sign off that this is a special student. We have a huge number of students. Everybody's got a Doogie Howser. And the coursework that comes in is highly variable. There is some that is good, but there is some that is just simply high school, and that's nothing more. This probably is the one good thing I have reported on in 10 years that has happened. Almost everything else has been fall back and hold. So this is good. It's going to take some time to enforce it, and it's going to take some time for people to get used to it.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about liquor sales and Uber. Be back in a minute.
If you like quality and selection, you'll love Yoder's Ornamental Concrete in Burton. With the best selection of fountains, bird baths, planters, benches, yard lights, animals, and figurines. You're sure to find the right piece for the right spot at your home or office. Since 1984, the Yoder family has been committed in making the finest of quality statuary. The largest statuary outlet in Kansas, located on Highway 50 in Burton, Kansas. That's Yoder's Ornamental Concrete.
We've been thinking, a pitcher who can paint the corners is known as a Rembrandt. Who doesn't love that kind of precision? At GMC, we get that. Not everyone can deliver a 95-mile-an-hour Rembrandt. This is precision. This is GMC. Now during the GMC Spring Sales event, get over $10,500 total value on specially equipped 2015 Sierra SLE models in stock the longest. Welcome to the show.
And welcome back. We're going to start with liquor sales. That's something we've been talking about all throughout the session, and in fact, last session as well. And looks like the Uncork, Kansas, Bob, I want to start with you on this one. Looks like Uncork, Kansas has maybe stalled. Would that be accurate?
I think so. There was some action just today, and it seems that there won't be any liberalization of where alcohol can be sold coming out of the Kansas legislature this year.
You know, it's interesting. We had Judge Journey on last week, and I think last week or the week before, we talked a little bit about this, and you know, he kind of bemoaned the loss of the mom and pops, which, you know, I can understand that, but I don't know if that's a good reason to keep something. I don't know how you think about that.
I think I heard you use the word nostalgia back then, and no, that's, you know, a good reason to make a movie or something, but not to base an economy upon. There is the idea that the small, or the people who own liquor stores now do have a license, that perhaps there's a property right in that, and some of the bills have included where a Walmart or whatever would have to purchase the license from a liquor store dealer who might want to get out of the business now. So that seemed to be a reasonable way to handle the perceived property right to be able to sell liquor in the state of Kansas, but it doesn't look like anything's going to happen this year.
Michael, were you surprised by this at all? I kind of thought this thing was going to sail on through.
A little bit surprised, Tim. I mean, there's so much political clout behind this. You've got the major grocery store chains like Dillon's, Kroger, and Walmart, and all of them really fighting on this. Convenience stores are really a force to be reckoned with in state politics. A lot of them max out contributions to state rep candidates or give money to two candidates running against each other so that whoever wins got a contribution from them. And they have a lot at stake with alcohol, tobacco, and gasoline. But man, there's so much lobbying muscle behind getting this thing passed, and I'm sure we've all gone shopping at the store and seen the Uncork, Kansas posters, and yet those small businesses organized grassroots. And remember, state reps and state senators are elected from communities, and those small businesses have been all over Twitter. They've been really keeping in personal touch with the state reps and state senators. They've been playing the nostalgia card. You're absolutely right. And playing the small business card. They really drove the small business against big guys card, pointing out that a lot of the entities fighting for Uncork Kansas are out-of-state entities. And I don't know how I feel about this personally, but I have to say that the small businesses really brought the grassroots lobbying power.
Michael, while we've still got you up in the box here, let's talk about Uber. This was kind of, I think, one of those situations where a lot of folks really never expected them to leave.
No, they really didn't. Uber plays hardball. They're so well organized politically. They've got David Plouffe, who's no less than the campaign director for the Obama 2008 campaign. They've also got former campaign director for Sam Brown back. They bring major political clout. They organize their drivers. They show up at state legislative committee and city council meetings with their Save Uber shirts. I mean, this is an entity that organized first and foremost politically, and they really bring it. And one of the things they'll do is they'll withdraw from a market if they don't like the legislation being passed. And it seems to be working because now Kansas is hammering out a compromise with them.
Bob, you've used Uber before, I know, as have I, and to a great deal of, I was pretty happy with it. I think it was pretty successful.
Yes, and when this issue came up, I don't know if it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, I talked to some of the people on both sides of the issue, and I didn't think I could really understand their arguments, and I never wrote an article about it. I mean, I had about Uber in the past, but not this recently. I just feel there was a lot of things going on that weren't really being said. But I'll tell you this, Tim, I don't think there was a problem with Uber. Uber had been operating in Wichita since last August. Don't think there was a problem. And then government really needs to earn the right to regulate. And what I mean by that is in 2012, we in Wichita revamped our taxi cab ordinances here in Wichita. They included a customer service class that's presented mandatorily by the Convention and Visitors Bureau for taxi cab drivers. There's also written into Wichita City Ordinance standards for the hygiene of taxi drivers and their cabs. Yet, not long after these ordinances were passed, the Wichita, through bureaucratic mishap, the city admitted it, they gave a taxi cab license to a convicted sex offender and he raped a passenger in Wichita. So do they have the right to regulate? And then there was an article in the letter to the editor in the Wichita Eagle Sunday. He said the cab driver picked him up at the airport was perfectly dressed for slopping hogs. The cab stank, and et cetera, like that. I'll take him at his word. So we have a taxi cab enforcement officer in Wichita. We have customer service courses, all this regulation, yet it doesn't seem to have caused the problem. Yet, I don't think there are widespread problems with Uber.
Richard, Uber?
I'm wondering to some extent if this isn't just an anti-regulation. Regulation bad, no regulation good. Because it's popping up not only in the education issues that we talked about, but I think it also pops up here. And there's more to regulation. Well, you have to have good administration. Some people believe that you need as little government as possible. If you have more government, it needs to be run well. It needs to do its job. It needs to have a badge and a gun and do what it's supposed to do to regulate. And when it doesn't do that, these are the responses that we get and can be completely, let's not have any regulation at all. But I have a feeling most people do want regulation that prevents that sex offender and the individual that's dishevelingly. Yeah.
When it works.
When it works.
I suppose. We're going to take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about Chris Kobach and his election bill.
You gotta top the charts to make it here. The Billboard Music Awards, with performances by music's biggest hit makers. Plus, an epic Breakfast Club tribute.
That's what I'm talking about.
Live tonight, only on ABC.
The EMC Cakeland Reading Caravan, awarding $500 grants to elementary libraries all across Cakeland.
If you know of a librarian or teacher you believe deserves recognition, you can nominate them at cake.com.
So we've had a Tempur-Pedic for a while, but now that we have the adjustable base, it's even better.
What? What is this? The foot thing lifts?
Save up to $300 instantly on Tempur-Breeze mattresses, plus add an adjustable base and receive up to a $300 Tempur-Pedic Visa prepaid card by mail.
Wait, where are you going? Love my bed. Oh, I love my bed.
Visit Mattress Firm, America's #1 Tempur-Pedic retailer today, and sleep happy tonight.
And welcome back. Chris Kobach has pushed for stricter rules and regulations when it comes to elections and the prosecution of folks that he says are breaking these rules in elections. And Michael, I'm going to start right off with you on this one. I think this one's near and dear to your heart.
It is near and dear to my heart. You're right, Tim. I think what you're alluding to is the bill that was really fell out from the U.S. Senate race this past year when you had Greg Orman, the independent candidate, getting a lot of support for Democrats. So the Democrat Chad Taylor withdrew, and Kobach didn't like that, and he wants to set a much higher bar for a candidate to withdraw from the race after being nominated from the primary. That's all well and good. I don't know how often that comes up. What I'm more concerned about, it's all well and good to put elections on the fall ballot instead of in the spring, which is a key part of this bill. I get it. The turnout is much higher in the fall, of course. But here's the problem. The problem is that Kobach also wants party labels on those elections for mayor, for school board, for these local elections. And that reintroduces the bottleneck in the form of the party primaries. Because how do you get the party label to run in the fall? You win in the party primary. Well, guess what? The party primary is another one of those low turnout elections. In fact, I wrote a column a few years ago, the big turnover in Kansas politics, the turn of the Kansas Senate from moderate to conservative Republicans, was accomplished by about 8,100 votes in a state of 3 million people. And it's because it happened in the party primary. And so I don't buy Kobach's argument that putting the election on the fall ballot is going to get more turnout and more democracy, because that would be great with no party labels, but you put the party labels on there, you're funneling everything through the party primary to get the endorsement to run in the fall, and we're back to low turnout elections. So I think it's more of a party grab at power than it is really a democratization.
Bob, we've got about 2 minutes left. You take one of them.
Well, I think that, I would like to see the elections move to the fall, and there's always been confusing to me is why would we move them to the fall of odd-numbered years, as has been some proposals, because you'd end up, with the same, I think, interest in the fall as there is in the spring. But to put them at the fall elections in even-numbered years when people are also voting for president, governor, senator, and things like that, yeah, I think it makes sense. And I know there's arguments that people won't have the wherewithal to really think about all the elections, all the offices they need to vote for. But, I don't think that's a concern right now, really. And I just think it would be a good idea to move into a fall of even years.
Richard, the party labels also seems to be part of the controversy here.
And both parties are a little bit worried now because for the first time in the last election cycle, across the country, there were 11 major independent candidates, and Orman, of course, was one of those, and they weren't just picking up a small amount of the vote, they were being a challenge. None of them won, but there may be dissatisfaction with all the gridlock and the party bickering to the extent that independents could come up in the middle and win.
Well, what's the status on this one? Does anybody know?
I've lost track of that, but I think moving to fall of even years is what's in consideration.
Yeah, I think
now.
that's what people are kind of interested in, and that's another one. It's been really interesting on the program to hear the varying opinions from guests concerning that, and I got to admit, this one has me torn just a bit because I do understand some of the reasons to keep them in the spring, but if we could get more turnout in the fall, it sure would be, I think, a positive thing. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for being on the program. Michael, thank you for being on the show as well. We appreciate you watching the show. If you have any questions or comments, please email me at thisweekinkansas@cake.com. I hope you have a wonderful week.
Now appearing